All right, guys, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. We are here for another week of the conversation before the conversation. We are covering the next iteration of the series on a sense of belonging, the foundations of belonging. And before we get going, just a heads up, if this is the first you're hearing about this series, you can head over to YouTube, Facebook, the podcast feed, the website, discoverthegrove.com, and you can take a look at the first two sermons in the series. I specifically bring this up because this one very much, each layer kind of builds off of each other, and so there may be some things that we talk about here and that get talked about on Sunday that may sound like we are picking up partway through the conversation. That's because the conversation started about 2 weeks ago. So this week we have Mike that is going to be preaching, and so why don't you go ahead and intro us into what exactly we're going to be talking about?
Sure. So this week we're focusing on it's called Foundations of Belonging, but we've focused on belonging with God, belonging with each other, and now as individuals, there's this sense that we can't really quench that tension that we have internally, and Blaise Pascal said that, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can never quote it correctly, but he said that so many of man's ills are caused because no one can sit in a room by themselves in quiet. Like the sense that we can't be solitary, that we can't be quiet and just be comfortable with ourselves is the source of tension in a lot of the world today.
Yeah.
So how do we reach that? How do we get to that point of being comfortable being who we are, that sense of belonging wherever we are, the sense that so it's not necessarily belonging to ourselves, right, but there's a peace that comes when we're belonging by ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I think that also it plays into like what we've talked about for the first 2 weeks. It's kind of like they're all interconnected. We have to preach it and speak it linearly, but it's interconnected. Mm-hmm. If you exist with this tension with yourself, you're not going to be creating or engaging in a community of belonging with one another. And that tension within yourself as well then plays into how you engage and commune with God. Mm-hmm. So this element of being at peace with yourself is really highly important for us in that sense of belonging, whether it's with God or with others. It all plays together.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept because there are different seasons that we go through individually, mm-hmm, where that sense of belonging or that sense of peace ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And so what's going on in the surface is so deeply affected by the sense of our belonging to God and our belonging with other people. Like those things often are the anchors that we hold on to when that internal chaos is going up and down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a personal experience of, walking through life where there's times where I'm like, man, I'm just like everywhere I go I belong, and then there's other times where it's like, man, I don't belong anywhere. I don't fit in. There's no experience of that. And so I think it's really important that we begin to grasp that emotional, personal health, mental health, because all of those layers of what goes on underneath the surface of our own lives and in our hearts and our minds, that deeply affects our sense of belonging as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to hearing how you pull this all together.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I know.
So one of the things that stands out to me, it's a note that Monday morning reflection brought to you by my beard this morning. If you saw this stream, you saw what I'm talking about. But I was up here and commenting on some of the things that you had brought forward when talking about the sense of community and how there's a duality to conceiving the topic. That there's the perspective of cultivating that environment for others, but also how do we respond when presented with the opportunity of that community? Can we accept that as individuals to step into the risk of relationship with other people and all of those kinds of things? And I think what you're getting at plays a factor into that at a church level, absolutely. And I'll say I'll widen that a little bit. Kind of that's one layer of it. Widen it a little bit. A people of God layer where it's not necessarily about stepping into the church, but it's still within a context of the people of God. But even to widen it even more, when you talk about things like family get-togethers, when you talk about things like those things that are kind of intrinsically tied to the holiday season, where I can tell you from my own personal experience with me moving as much as I did and going from place to place to place. I would always talk about how I was very transient and I didn't really and so I kind of at the time celebrated the idea that I didn't really belong any one place. I could go anywhere and be able to do my thing, but I can look back now at this stage of my life and look back at basically the bulk of my 20s and say, there were things inside of me that were unsettled that I was unwilling to really establish those relationships, plus or minus a small handful of people along the way that that I had ended up, developing a relationship with or whatever. But yeah, that's I think the thing that you're tapping on the head on this one. This is a big deal to talk about in the holiday season because it is so tied to those other layers of, okay, so then how do I feel about myself? How does that inform the context that I'm in? And what does that say, to go back to the root message, the very first week of this? What does that say about my relationship with God? How does that inform how I conceive of the character of God and all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, I think you brought up a good example of yourself being like transient. And I've known several other people in this, like this, who they kind of go, something I don't like here, and so I'm moving over here.
Yep.
And then they'll spend a couple years there and go, well, I don't like here, and so I'm moving over there.
Yep.
And what I've observed is what they don't like is what they're bringing with them. They're not going to a new location and saying, this location or this context sucks, I don't like this. That may be how it's processed, but in most cases of people I've known and engaged with, when they're transient like that, they keep bringing all the stuff with them that they don't like, and they don't realize it. So it's a lack of understanding yourself. It's a lack of understanding your own defense mechanisms, your own emotional health, your own internal tensions, and you bring all that with you. So no matter where you go, the context, you're not going to like it because of that.
I don't know about you, being another person who's done a lot of traveling over the years and all of that kind of stuff and lived a lot of different places, but from me, I can absolutely say that bang on, like 100% bullseye. Like that, there's a lot of truth to you bring your own stuff with you.
Yep.
If you're nose blind to it, then suddenly a couple of years pass and I'm like, oh man, I'm getting that itch
itch.
again.
To go? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that happens often. My experience was a little different because I moved mostly when I was younger. So I was in 7 different schools by the time I was in the 6th grade.
Right.
You know, and so it was like I was always the new kid. So for me, a lot of what I experienced as a kid, and it's only been in the last couple of years that I began to realize, oh, this is why family was so important, because family didn't leave, but this is also why I was always reluctant to invest in relationships, because they were never going to be around.
Yeah.
So I could make friends fast. I could go deep, but I kept people at an arm's length.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it was like, yeah, because you're going to leave.
Yep.
Just like, and so I saw that. But even I was just reading an article this last week on marriages where couples that have been divorced and then remarried and then divorced and then like at some point they get to a spot where they say, I'm not going to go through this divorce again, and then they start digging in and trying to figure out what was going on that they brought with them and their own story into the relationship. And that was like a real interesting thing to go like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because it's everything that we've talked about with, like, you know, that made for life, that well-being is like you've got to know what's going on beneath the surface of your life so that you can engage and address. And you can't really engage well in community unless you are moving towards healing and health in your own life at a inner level.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you get it right, but it means you're learning who you are. You're comfortable in your own skin. You're getting to a spot where it's like, oh, the dumb thing is that life all of a sudden will throw a wrench in what you thought you were, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh crud, now I gotta
Who
figure
am I now?
Who am I now?
Right. I want to encourage folks that are watching that don't have the years of context of knowing Scott and what he says and what he means in his heart and all of that kind of stuff. Don't hear what he didn't say, because it's not a matter of making sure that your side of the street is fully and completely clean and clear and all of that kind of stuff before you can engage with people. He's not laying a burden on you to make sure that your house is fully tidy before anything can happen. It's a matter of being aware of what you bring to the table, good, bad, and indifferent, and being self-aware enough, because if you're not, then you're coming with things that are going to muddy the waters or create division or cause problems or different things like that, as literally we all do. We all have those problems. They just look and sound and smell differently for each individual person.
Yeah.
And I think that to continue that a little bit, when you learn to be patient with yourself, that teaches you to be patient with other people.
Yeah.
And I think that the people who are most impatient with others, they either, this is very common psychologically, emotionally, you've all experienced it, you watching have all experienced it, that the thing that annoys you about yourself probably is what annoys you the most about somebody else as well. Like if it's a lack of patience.
I'm not going to do what my parents did, and then you find yourself doing it.
Yeah. And you know, maybe you're an aggressive driver, so other aggressive drivers just absolutely drive you bonkers. That's what angers you. Then maybe you're a perfectionist, and so other perfectionists will drive you crazy. Or like it's usually the things that bother us about ourselves, because we're not patient with ourselves, and then that flows into other relationships.
Yeah.
So we have to get to that point of going, here's how I interact, here's what I know about me. Wow, there's some areas where this is not good. These are not places. Right. But then you can go 2 different directions. So this is a place where I struggle. Man, I'm such an idiot. I'm such a miserable person. Yeah. Or you could go, this is a place where I struggle. I'm so glad I know that now.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that it's a place where I recognize, and now there's movement and I can grow, and there's a direction for me to like kind of weigh in on how was I a year ago. You know, I don't struggle with this as much this year as I did last year.
Yeah.
This is good. I'm being patient with myself. But if you constantly are going to, I'm not perfect, therefore I'm miserable. I'm a terrible person and an idiot. You're going to see everybody else that way too.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if you are judging your standard of progression, how was I a day ago? Well, day after day is different.
Yep.
Yesterday was a different day than today, and it's going to be a different day than tomorrow. But okay, so how was I a week ago? I don't know. Like you're still too close. A month ago, that's the first time where you're like, okay. 6 months ago, well, now you can start to at least say what was the last. Now you can start to look at that runway a little bit.
Yeah.
A year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago. The further back that you can look, the wider the angle is and the better perspective that you can have.
Yeah.
It is so painfully hard when you are in the day-to-day trenches of trying to work your way through, especially if it's a difficult season or I call them high volume seasons, where it's not necessarily specifically just hard. It may be challenging spiritually. It may be just something that really takes a lot of precision to work your way through. There might not necessarily be one continuous emotion that you can put to it, but they're high volume of things that it takes from you in order to get through that season. And so being able to look at it with an appropriate lens really does matter when trying to like give yourself a break a little bit as far as all of this stuff goes, because the reality is, especially if you tend to being more of a creative type or anything like that, we are usually our own biggest critics. Most of the time we are usually hardest on ourselves. And I guess for me, the thing that really caught my attention, and I've said this here on the show a couple of times, this phrase imago Dei, right? Image bearers of God. Okay, well, if think about this for a second. If we take seriously the idea of people being image bearers of God, well then wait a minute. That means you're an image bearer of God. That means you're an image bearer of God. That means I'm an image bearer of God. That means you're an image bearer of God. And so that same idea gets brought forward to the person as much as it does how we view other people, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you bring it up because that's where I'm starting. That's the starting point for the message this week, is to recognize ourselves as image bearers, and then what that means.
Right.
Like to go into we can throw the term around. But I'm defining it, getting everyone on the same page with that, because I think that's the foundation that we have to start with ourselves and with other people. I want to back up though, because you said something that I think is really important to pull out a little bit more. That time period, the 6-month time period, the year-long time period. Anytime I do any type of discipleship or counseling, I always try to I never look at what were you last month. I always, 6 months is the minimum. Because that's really important to be able to get that scope. But I think I guess it's kind of a flip side. It's also important to go, when you're examining yourself or you're talking to someone else, it's important to go, what has the last 6 months been like? What has the last year been like? So, and I find my son will do this. He's 17 and he's like, oh man, I'm so tired. I slept really well last night. And I'll go, well, you spent the night at your friend's house and you guys didn't sleep. You came home at 8:30 in the morning and went to bed, and you can't wake up the next morning and go, man, why am I so tired? You just were awake for 24 hours straight. That's why you're tired, but you can't recover in 2 days. We're that way emotionally. if the last month or the last 6 months or the last year has been one of those high volume seasons like you talk about, you can't, even if you come out of that high volume season, you can't just go, why am I so tired? Why am I so angry? Why am I so impatient? Why am I so depressed? Why am I feeling burnt out? Like, whatever it is, there are precursors to all of that.
Right.
And if you've spent months in this time, you have to be able to look at that and then say, oh, I get it. You know, it's not just the last week that's been rough. It's several months. Or maybe the last 2 weeks have been great, but I still feel exhausted.
Yeah. The other day, I ended up, we were watching a cooking show. For those of you that don't know, I spent a long time as a chef.
I always thought you were going to talk about your love for like cooking shows, and I was just baffled at that.
I mean,
I'm wrong.
yes,
I mean, you know.
I do also love cooking shows.
Do you like the Great British Bake Off?
Actually, yes. As a matter of fact,
fantastic.
that is like soul candy. It's just so wholesome.
Zuma's Desserts?
Yeah. That's another one. That's another one.
Is it cake?
Yeah,
You like that one?
it's fine.
Sorry. All right. Back off.
Anyway, but so we were watching something, and there was a moment where somebody was getting very passionate about the idea of the star system, of Michelin star system, James Beard award system, all of that kind of stuff. And we paused it, and I started going into a story about a restaurant that I cooked at that was up for star consideration and all of that. And I'm talking to my wife about this, and I started to get choked up, and I'm not catching it. I'm not understanding why I'm getting choked up and all of that kind of stuff. Well, the story centered around a guy that I cooked with who I lost a handful of months ago, and all of that. The guy, one of those guys that during my nomadic years just happened to stick, and all of that kind of stuff. But it's one of those examples where we can get so caught in the rhythms of life and the minutia and the constant it's coming, it's high volume, it's my brain is always on the next thing, that sometimes we need somebody to come alongside us and be like, hey, this is what's triggering you. This is what's upsetting you. This is what's going on. Like you did with your son, and like what my wife did with me. Like, you know, and I think that's a testament to the power of having people around us that can speak into, that have the authority to be able to speak into a context and say, yo, this is, you know, maybe take a look here, maybe, you know, different things like that. Because again, to go back to where we started, how intrinsically tied all of this stuff is. And like I said this morning on the stream, scientifically, sociologically, biblically, on every single level, categorically, humans do better in healthy community. That's just a general statement that is provable beyond reasonable doubt. And so, yes, that comes with a giant asterisk. See previous conversations, see larger contexts.
And
There's
the word-
a lot
and
that
the word
goes
healthy.
in the word healthy, you know. But yeah, I mean, that's so important to be able to have those voices that can speak into the context like that, you know.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, both of you guys gave that, what I mentioned in the last teaching on it is, like, if you really want to experience belonging with the people of God, you've got to be in a place where you're like fully known and deeply loved.
Yeah.
And so your wife, both of those for you.
Yep.
You know, you for your son, both of those.
Yep.
And I think that's scary.
That's terrifying.
And so that's why those relationships tend to be pretty small.
Yeah.
And so what does it look like to then create and nurture a community that has the shadows of that type of knowledge and love, that looks out for, that's been invited into our lives, and that we don't just like pound into it, like somebody forces their way into your life and starts wanting you to unpack everything. That's not That's not healthy.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But if you create the place where there can be relational time and development and getting like people that begin to understand the nuances, it's just hard. In my mind, as I listen to you guys talk, it's like, man, there's so many times where you walk really closely with someone and you feel like they know you, and then there's other times where you're with that same person and you're like, do you even know me?
Yeah.
And that's where I
Yeah.
think that patience piece comes in, because I see that in the Psalms.
Yeah.
Like David, like, that sense of God, you're everywhere, and then same page, God, where are you?
Yeah.
And so there's that ebb and that flow that we go through, and that's why I think learning to understand what's going on in our own hearts, our own minds, where we're at in life, whether we're exhausted because of those high volume seasons, or if there's other extenuating circumstances going on, as we begin to understand what's going on in our own lives, that allows us to then engage in ways that are healthy and helpful for other people.
Yeah.
Without that, we're just throwing out what we think might work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And we're not actually experiencing the kind of life that we're offering.
I think it's important to realize that we emanate what's going on internally, whether or not we are intentional about it.
Yeah.
So it's like that. It's like a lamp. You know, there's light coming out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hotter in the middle, but it's lighting up a lot around it.
Yep.
And we kind of
Yeah.
walk around emotionally like that.
Yeah.
I know that you guys know this. There's times where you are around a person who is trying to be kind,
Yeah.
trying to be nice, but there's something going on internally that you still don't want to be around them. Like, it feels off.
Yeah.
It feels
Yeah.
dangerous. It feels unsafe.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that is an internal emanation of what is happening, and we have to be aware of those. That's what you said. It's scary to be that vulnerable, to be in a community, and I wonder why. Like,
Yeah.
that's like, yes, it is,
yeah.
but what is it? And that was
Yeah.
one of the things I was thinking about, is that
Yeah, I think so. Like, an example of it is, I think it's just because the more vulnerable you are, you open yourself up to getting hurt. And
Yeah.
so much of culture
Yep.
hurts with knowledge.
Yep.
And so to be honest and to be really known
yeah,
is to expose yourself to rejection.
Yeah.
Is to expose yourself
Yep.
to a lot of those things, and that matters, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like I had somebody that has come up to me and it was like, hey, and this is somebody I've been friends with for a long time. So, hey, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm all right. And they're like, no.
yeah,
How are you doing? I know you.
yeah,
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. And so at that point, you have the choice.
Yep.
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
the choice.
yeah.
Yep.
Do I enter into being known, you know,
Yep.
more fully, or do I keep it at a surface level?
Yeah.
And there may be a variety of reasons for why you choose to go in or you don't, but it's the decision you have to make. And so, like, for me at least, I evaluate in those instances, one, does this person actually know me?
Yeah.
Have they demonstrated that they know me and that they've loved me through ups and downs and all of that? And then, am I ready to open up that layer of my life with them?
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so you have that question, and you're faced with that decision. Do
Yep.
I build community, or do I just go up? And so I started to talk, and we got through, and he went, yeah, I've known you've been off for a couple of weeks, you know.
Yeah.
And you're just sitting there, and you're like, really? Because I just thought I was tired, you
Yeah.
know. But it's different, and so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you carry your stuff more visibly than you think.
Yep.
And
Yes.
and
Yep.
so people that know us can step into that.
Yep.
People that don't know us just keep us at a distance because they're like, there's something going
Something's
on,
going
and
on.
I don't have the space for that.
I don't have the capacity to
Yeah.
get into it.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think it also depends, like, there's, you talked about two different people in that scenario. The person that knows you well
Yeah.
enough
Yeah.
to ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That has the courage to do
That
that.
has the
right?
courage
Yeah.
to do it, has the willingness and the empathy, you know, to say, I feel something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
There's more than just you didn't get enough sleep last night.
Yeah.
Right.
But the second person is you. That has to be aware enough of yourself to honestly answer that question.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, that's kind of more, you talked about community.
Yeah.
That's that external
Yep.
last week. That's the person knowing you well enough to ask it. This week, I'm talking about the person that's being asked.
Yep.
Do you
Yeah.
know yourself well enough to honestly answer
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously, you have to know yourself enough to answer it, and then you have to be courageous enough to answer it.
Yeah, yeah, and there's that other piece of, do you know other people well enough to look out for their souls
Yep.
and their well-being
Yep.
as well,
Yeah.
so that they don't feel alone? Because when you're walking through, a darker season, that's a really lonely place.
Yeah.
Especially like if you get into that like if you struggle with emotional well-being or your mental health or anything like that, if you're in those darker places, like, and nobody asks,
Yep.
like all of a sudden it feels like, oh wow, I'm really unlovable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like, and that undermines a sense of belonging as well. And so and again, I'm not
Or you
talking
feel
about
invisible.
extremes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Just like
invisible. I'm
nobody
just
cares.
like, I just float through a room,
Yeah.
and I right back out,
Yeah.
and nobody notices whether I'm here or not.
Yeah.
There's no sense of belonging in that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the external piece of it.
Yeah, there's something to exploring the extremes, but there is something to taking a step back from just going to extreme examples and really taking time to dig into what does this look like when it's closer to status quo than to red line emergency.
Yeah.
Because I think in a lot of ways that gives a truer look at where you're at versus being pressed with this very extreme
Sure.
example.
Yeah. I think the example of the friend just showing up and being like, hey, how are you doing? And
Yeah.
when I give him the answer, he's like, no. Like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
man, like, really? Like,
Yeah.
that's more status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's somebody that just, hey, I'm going to step into your life right now because you've stepped into mine and
Yeah.
you've been a friend for me. And I'm like, okay, well, I trust this person enough to be like, yeah, this is what's going on. And this is where I'm at. And then it's like, yeah, I've known. And I'm like, well, I haven't had a conversation with you in a really long time. So how do you make that assessment? You know?
Yeah.
It's like, I just see your body language.
Yeah.
I see the way, like, yeah, I can see the smile, I can see whatever, but I know you.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
And the thing that I find interesting about the dynamics of those kinds of people in our lives is that doesn't always happen as a result of 5, 10, 20, 30 years of friendship. It can.
Yeah.
You would hope that
Yeah.
somebody who knows you that long would know you
would
that
get you there.
that
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But there's a gentleman that's a part that's a part of the Grove family that since we worked shoulder to shoulder over the summer, he has this uncanny ability to see through the I'm fine of it all and ask you like, where are you actually? And like, I joke that he's kind of like a motivational tape on legs because he'll be the first one to tell you like, I love you, buddy. And like, just, you're doing a great job and those kinds of things, but it's genuine. It's a person who actually is looking out for other people. And that's something that, man, I didn't know him before the summer. You know what I mean? Like that was the first really that we met.
Yeah.
And so, but it is this weird paradigm of you do have to make when you are dealing with relationship, and I do think that there is a context of a time and a place and all of that. That yes, when you have that choice of can we dig in, don't dig in, there's several factors that go into still investing in the community and that communal experience with still like not just throwing open your book bag and just start lobbing bricks out onto the table and all of that kind of stuff. And so all of those things, as you're walking through them, are very nuancy and very situational. You know what I mean? Because you have to be aware of what can a person handle, or is this the right time? Is this the right place? Because I do think that there is still a security blanket of, I'm going to walk into a room and here's my junk. Right? There's this idea of authenticity in media, and when you're behind the mic and all of that kind of stuff. And when I realized, as a media person, one of my gimmicks was going to be raw conversation, I realized very quickly, you can just tell the right version of the story that brings people into feeling like, wow, they just shared all of this stuff, but really you didn't say much of anything at all. And that's a wild thing. When I realized that, I was like, whoa, that's weird, but very, very true. And so just dumping stuff out onto the table isn't authenticity. It's not building that community and all of that. There can be moments where it's like, okay, look, you really want to know? This is what I'm walking through right now. But it could be those little moments where you walk up to somebody and you're like, how are you today? And like, you don't necessarily like, I feel like you and I do this a lot with each other on Sunday mornings, where it's never a faux answer, but it's, you know, we're not like, we're both doing things most Sunday mornings, running around, doing things, all that kind of stuff. So you know that this isn't going to be the time where you're going to get the full version. You may get Spark Notes, you may get Reader's Digest, that sort of thing. I just dated myself.
Wow. What's funny is I was like, Spark Notes weren't around when I was in school.
But Reader's Digest.
That's how I read Jaws.
The best part is we have a subscription to Reader's Digest.
That still exists?
Well, that does still exist.
I want to mention something here because of the context that you brought up. I think is an important thing to pull out a little bit. Is that on Sunday mornings, we see each other early. You're usually here about the same time I am. You're getting things ready, the tech stuff ready, AV stuff. I'm here preparing for worship, to do a rehearsal and all of that. But it is in those moments that one of us will say, hey, how's it going? How's your weekend? Or how's the day? And we've said, it sucks. I'm barely here. I'm like hanging on, or yesterday was okay. I'm really exhausted today. Whatever it is, but there's an authenticity to the answer that isn't just good. I'm fine. This is fine. And to be comfortable enough with each other to say that and to not feel like, okay, now we have to have a counseling session. Now we have to talk. Now we have to give more. Now, like, I think that that's a beautiful thing. And there are a handful of people here in the church, and I think it's great over the last going on 13 years now that we have embraced as a community a sense of authenticity where you can ask someone how you're doing and they will give you that answer. They'll give you not very good, or it's been a sucky week, or I'm glad that I'm here. That's about as far. I have one guy who facetiously says, I'm awake and I'm dressed. I don't know what more you want. Like, those types of answers are more authentic than just, I'm fine, I'm okay. And they also speak to the level of relationship in the community to be able to accept an answer like that and just go, yeah, me too. Or, I know what that feels like. And not feel like we need 10 minutes of a conversation because we feel like we have to fix something. I think that's where the tension comes from in asking that question and then getting an answer that is authentic, getting an answer that does delve into, this is kind of a dark place. The sense that the questioner gets is, now I have to fix it. If you've told me that you're in a dark place, now I have to bring
Now I
light.
have
Now I have
to-
to
yes,
fix
This
it.
is my responsibility.
Yeah. And so that keeps us from asking those questions. When we feel that responsibility, it keeps us from asking. It's kept me from asking the questions.
Yeah.
Because I've known what's going on in a person's life. And if I ask them a question, as a pastor, I learned very early on, like within the first few months, when you ask that question as a pastor, they will give you the answer.
Yep.
And then you go, I didn't count on 10 or 15 minutes of a conversation with
Yeah.
somebody bearing their soul to me.
Yep.
I was just being polite.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh yeah.
now, we don't want to do that though, but that's what we don't want is, I'm just being polite, just give me the okay answer
Yeah.
so we can move on.
Yeah.
But it's okay to not fix it as well, to feel that way.
And that's a picture of that being committed.
Yeah.
That you are with someone for the long haul.
Yeah. Yep.
Whether you stay to like in the same place or vicinity, but like there is a commitment to, no, I'm here. I'm going to. These are my people. This is where I belong. I'm committed to being with this group, and then opening doors.
Yeah.
Like, just because the door is open doesn't mean you barge in.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
I know good and well that on a Sunday morning, I'm not going to get to have a long conversation with either of you
Right. Right.
because we have things to get done that day.
Yep.
It is good to know if I sit here and I get it, and I can just read body language often. But if I ask the question, "How are you doing?" and one of you says, like, you don't say anything because you don't have the words to actually describe how you're feeling.
Yep.
I know in that moment I can't just be like, okay, well let's get this together.
Yeah.
I may give you a hug,
Right.
Yeah.
and then I go, and then I know, okay, listen, I'm probably gonna circle back around and check on my friend.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, when there isn't so much going
Yeah.
on, but I know I'm also going to be praying for you in that moment, and that's the dynamic that I think so much happens when you know someone's story. You don't have to fix it, but your presence,
Yeah.
knowing that you're there, makes a huge difference.
Yep.
I'll give you an example of this. We have someone that I know whose wife passed away several years ago, and yesterday was the anniversary of that. And I didn't get a chance to catch him on the front side, but I got done teaching, walked back, and there was a seat open next to him, and I just went and I sat down and I put my arm around him and I just sat there with him. We got done. I gave him a hug. I told him I loved him. If there's anything I can do, please let me know.
Yep.
Now, I don't know whether that was meaningful to him or not, but for me, that was, I know you. I love you. You don't have to pour your guts out to me right now. This is not the time or the
Yeah.
place with how you're doing.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know you're not alone in this place.
Right.
Like, but there have been times where when I am not emotionally well, I would have a real hard time doing that out of the fear of what if they,
Yep. Yep.
what if the weight of that they're carrying gets put on me, and
Can't handle
am I connected to the Lord enough to carry this? Because I don't feel like
Yeah.
I am on my own right
Right.
now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it matters that you are at least self-aware enough to know the community where you're at and to understand the context and to step into it. Understanding what's the time and place.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and I think that's that presence is critical for a healthy community, because I know for myself, I don't often feel like getting into a long conversation about what's going on in me. Yeah, I know that's surprising to you guys. But
What you guys don't know is off camera he's a chatterbox. He will not shut up.
Oh man,
I am an open book.
he just walks into my office all the time just to be like, "Hey, I just want to sit here because
Zero boundaries. Just
Yeah, my emotions are just on my sleeve.
Yeah.
It's the presence of people that care that is strengthening. So that's
Yeah.
it helps when because many of us don't know what's going on inside.
Yeah.
We don't know what emotional state we are in. It's usually a huge bundle of various complex emotions. And you're not going to work that out in a 10-minute conversation. You're not
Right.
going to work that out in an hour-long counseling session. That will take years to disentangle the complexities of what's going on internally. And it takes the Holy Spirit's help as well to untangle that. So what is important to me is knowing that there are those who are present in the midst of it.
Yeah.
That the untangling is that as it gets long and drawn out and we're figuring it out, that there are people in my life that are there to help untangle it as well. And I think that that's what authenticity does for a community, is provide that presence and provide the opportunity to just go, I don't know what to say, but I know you're with me.
Yeah.
And so presence is so important, just to know that you're with me.
Right. And to go back to, as we transition towards the end of today's conversation, to go back to the very beginning of what it is that we talked about. When you look at the entirety of a community, every person comes into the community, right? That's literally a community, is a multiplicity of people. Every single person is coming in with their own story, with their own experiences, all of that kind of stuff. And one of you guys said the shadows of the presence of Christ, however exactly you said it, and that love and that connectedness. But part of those shadows that lurk within a community is every person's shadow side. The side B of an individual that is made up of those experiences, that is made up of hurts usually, of different things that tends to be our place of reaction, and that place that oftentimes, unfortunately, informs how we see ourselves in light of the world in existence, but how we see ourselves within the context of a community. And so that goes back to that idea of embracing that community from a healthy standpoint on either side, being that person who could be a presence for somebody else, but even just being a part of the community involves this idea of being aware of where you're at, being aware of what's going on with you and all of those kinds of things. So that way, that awareness can give you an idea of what's going on, and that awareness that's a good starting point from saying, oh, hey, when in this interaction, I reacted this way internally. Or, oh, hey, I feel like I can't be a part of this community for such and such a reason. Asking yourself, well, why did I react that way? What brought me to that conclusion? What else is going on here? And asking those investigating questions allows you to at least start to identify pain points and all of that kind of stuff. That maybe for the individual, the answer is, like you said, it takes years to unravel this thing, because generally it takes years to create the knot. And so when you're unraveling it, that may look like, well, look, you may need to start having a conversation with somebody with initials after their name, and all of those kinds of things, and that may be part of it, but just simply being able to connect with another human being and position yourself to even remotely feel like you are known or loved at any level, let alone on the runway to fully known and fully loved, then addressing your individual component that you bring into the collective and who you are in light of who God says that you are all significant pieces of the larger puzzle that, yes, we are bringing it up within the context of an Advent season, a Christmas season, a holiday season, because this is where a lot of that stuff starts to bring up to the top, right? You boil soup, and as you boil soup, part of what you do is you scum the top. All of those imperfections of the stuff that you put into the soup all comes up to the top as you're boiling it, and so you take a strainer and you start to scum those things off the top. That the holiday season can act like that boiling pot that brings those things up to the surface and stuff like that. This is something that extends way beyond just the holiday season.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, as a part of a community, the kind of environment that we create matters, because somebody that's trying to figure out some of the stuff with where they're at, they're not going to just come in and generally they're not going to come in and just go, all right, well, here's everything about me.
No. Yeah, exactly.
They're going to come in, they're going to observe and assess who are the safe people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where are the safe places where maybe I can pull back the curtain a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think there is an element of, when you find a safe place to belong, it then allows you to do some of that internal work to then like figure out what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the church is a great opportunity for it, but the place where I honestly see it happen most often probably is in like recovery groups.
Oh yeah.
Where there is a degree of honesty that's there, and if you show up and you're just like, I don't have anything to share.
Yep.
Like there's plenty that I could share, but I don't know if I'm ready to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like there is a trust and a safe environment there for people to talk about what they are walking through if they choose to do that.
Yep.
And I think I'd love to see the church grasp onto some of that, to be a safe place for people to come in and observe who are the safe people. Is this a safe place? Okay, now I can start to work on unraveling some of those knots in collaboration with the Spirit of God and people that I trust.
And one of the things that stands out to me in what you just said, Scott, is generally, not always, but generally, recovery groups tend to be smaller. But when you come into a recovery group, I can tell you that there is this level of, okay, I'm looking around, and if you're sitting at this table, oh, that means you're screwed up like I'm screwed up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And at least there's a baseline there. It doesn't have anything to do with the size of the group.
Yeah.
And I needed, look, but full disclosure, y'all, I needed to learn that lesson. I came in, the house church guy, I came in hyper-focused on the size of the assembly, the context of the all like that was the focus. But that culture can happen with a group of 5, a group of 10, a group of 50, a group of 60, a group, you know what I mean? Like that can be a culture that is pervasive in any size environment. And I agree that the church should be that.
Yeah. It won't happen unintentionally.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is. And on that note, guys, we appreciate the fact that you guys have joined us for this, and just understand that as we are talking about the subject matter, I speak for my brothers here that all of us understand that this is not easy stuff a lot of the time. If you are coming with this kind of baggage, this is really hard to work through because it is so intrinsically tied to every single layer of it. So please understand that we don't know the context, we don't know the stories, we don't know the individual, but just our prayers are with you, that you are able to focus on the unchanging, unfailing character of God and build out from there. Again, it extends past just the holiday season. This isn't something you take out of the box on December 1 and put back in the box on December 26th. This is something that if this did bring that scum up to the top and all of that, well, maybe it might be time to start asking questions. Maybe it might be time to start trying to identify things and things like that. But we don't say any of these things flippantly, and so just understand that this is something that we are prayerful of when it comes to the stories that are involved with the people that may be struggling here and all of that. And if there is anything that we have addressed that you're like, well, wait a minute, you guys hit the gas here, or you guys, I'd like some more clarification on this. Seriously, we encourage you to drop a comment where on scroll down, hit drop a comment and let us know, like, what are your questions. If you don't feel comfortable with asking in a public forum, you can head on over to Facebook and find The Grove, shoot us a message. We'll see that message, one of us will respond. If you interact with the page, one of us or Jeremy will generally be who you're gonna get on the responding end. And so I say all of that to say we encourage the dialogue, we encourage the conversation. If you're part of the physical Grove family and we talk about these things, or if Mike brings up another layer of this and you've got questions on Sunday, we have the weekly Q&R as well that you can go ahead and find one of us and ask away.
Yep.
So, but that's it for now.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.